If you're enjoying the Health Geeks Book Club podcast, we'd appreciate if you hit the subscribe button, leave a like, rating, or review, whichever your preferred podcatcher platform allows. The Health Geeks would like to apologize to Dr. Jen Gunter for mispronouncing her name in our discussion of the Menopause Manifesto. Again, to the listeners, it is Dr. Jen Gunter.
This edition of our podcast is brought to you by 360 Health and Well Balanced Nutrition.
Welcome to the Health Geeks Book Club podcast. Listen in as Kristen Norton and Eleanor Russell review all those great health and wellness books you've been wanting to read or you have read and want to talk about. Here's Kristen and Eleanor.
You know, it's funny. When Eleanor and I sat down to discuss how we were going to talk about the Menopause Manifesto, we're like, how are we going to have several conversations around this? And here we are, finding it hard to stop talking about all these different topics. I just want to open this podcast with a funny story inside of this book about Lydia Pinkham.
Good old Lydia.
She invented a concoction of alcohol, roots, and herbs in her kitchen in 1873. Her business, whatever she had going, started small, but then people started asking for her product, and it grew from there. And this was advertised as a concoction that helped with anemia, low spirits, cramps, depression, just not feeling like doing anything. And it got quite popular, very popular. So in 1911, it was tested and the results published in the British Medical Journal, like, what is the active ingredient here? And they really couldn't find evidence of any active substances. But one thing is that it was 19.3% alcohol, okay? So our author, Jen Gunter, she was like...
In the Menopause Manifesto.
In the Menopause Manifesto, she takes it into her own hands to experiment. Is the alcohol the active ingredient here? Is this why this thing works?
Yeah, she's very creative.
Yeah, it is. This is in the midst of COVID and the wildfires of California. So she's like, of course, I didn't have a problem finding a day that I could experiment with this. So that 19.3% apparently is the same as a port wine would be.
Oh, yes.
So she just kind of took a dose every, I don't know, I think it's 2 or 3 times a day that they recommend it. So
she had a scheduled dosing.
Yeah. So she was like, well, it turns out a little bit of alcohol throughout the day doesn't make the day so bad.
Lydia Pinkham.
So, you know, this book is interesting. Lots of things in here that we could talk about.
And she has a sense of humor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's little stories like that and her little punches of feminism. It helped me get through the book.
Absolutely.
But real quick, that Lydia Pinkham stuff, I Googled that expecting it to be like this ancient thing that's advertised. It's still out there and going strong. And there's a lot of videos on TikTok that say, my mom and my grandma recommend this for, and it's recommended for all kinds of things passed down. So I think she brings it up as a menopause cure, but it's also like to help with your fertility. And I'm not saying
relax
that's
those
what
inhibitions.
I'm not saying that's what it does, but that's what the TikTok world is touting, and I'm like, oh my gosh.
Well, I remember there was some article that came out in a journal about how alcohol during college years and unplanned pregnancies were related. It's like, you had to do a study on that? It's
right.
Like,
why did we need to prove that?
Yeah, I think that was common knowledge. So, but anyway, yeah.
Well, just common sense.
Well, perhaps, yeah. But the idea of supplements like that and buying products, not all of them are equal, like you said, and they talk about them being unregulated, but they are semi-regulated because the FDA, if there's too many adverse effects, they'll pull products and fine companies. So it's on the other side; it's not on the front side, which would be maybe not a bad idea. I don't know. Did you had something you really wanted to share here? How are we going to work that in?
Well, I mean, this kind of misinformation or things that are passed down by word of mouth is just a good example of how if we don't understand science or the scientific method, we can really get swept away. And I had a friend send me this video and say, "What do you think of this?" And I wanted to share it with the listeners.
And it's related to nutrition, correct?
It is related to nutrition.
And we have been talking about menopause and diet and the effect of that. So this is somewhat relevant. And we've also talked about where do you get your information.
Right.
Let's hear it. Let's see what you got to share.
Okay.
Food pyramid, which turns out is a pyramid scheme. Big Food has been buying off scientists to study some of their unhealthiest products and recommend them as a crucial part of a healthy diet. So now, we have a brand new food pyramid where frosted mini wheats are healthier than grilled chicken. I swear.
No.
Primetime decided to dig into this little study today, and it was done by researchers at Tufts University,
That's correct.
a safety school.
This study.
And paid for by Fauci's cabal over at the NIH, the so-called National Institute of Health, NIH. It claims that foods we thought were healthy, like meat and eggs, are terrible for us, and recommends replacing them with junk food, manufactured by America's largest food conglomerates. See where this is going?
Good.
That was it.
Go
Yeah.
it, yeah.
All right, let's talk about that.
All utter BS, by the way.
Well, no. There's some stuff
There's
here.
some things there that are true. So this was a Fox News clip, right? And then Joe Rogan, I think, took it on his podcast, and then it just spiraled on the internet. Like, we've got a new food pyramid. First of all, we don't.
Correct.
The food pyramid.
That has been verified by both you and me.
Right. That has been long gone. I think since 2011 maybe is when that went away, the food pyramid. It is now My Plate.
Yep.
And those are dietary guidelines for the general public. And this research study out of Tufts is that it's a research study. It does not replace the guidelines, nor does it right now,
And it didn't really say,
influence them in any way.
It seemed to me it didn't say these things are better. What it did was apply a number scale system
Right.
to evaluating different food group items. So it is part of a data structure. I mean, it looks like it's a preliminary step to say, let's look at how you would build a healthy diet. And maybe there's another way to come up with the recommendation. So this is really early in any sort of revision as far as I can tell. But Tufts is a wonderful institution. Now, I will say they made a comment about big pharma and big dairy and all these things supporting research, and they do. So we've talked about that in the Food Fix, where, who is funding the research and the conclusions, and do the investigators relinquish the right to publish, if they find things that don't go with what their funding agency was hoping they would find. Some of them sign agreements that say they won't publish that. But the ones that you want are the ones that relinquish that oversight from the funding agency.
Right. And yes, we do need to be aware of that, but not every study that is funded by a food company or
Correct.
the company that may benefit from that is going to be biased.
And that's what I'm saying, because
Yeah.
they relinquish that publishing right thing. So the scientist has,
Can publish
Yeah, they can
whatever
still
the
have
result
bias.
is.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if it's structured properly and it can be evaluated by peers in the literature, then it's, goes through more rigor than someone grabbing one who is not a scientist, who is a TV personality, who says, we now have a new, food pyramid, and it's not accurate.
It's not. And boy, that spread like wildfire.
Yeah,
there.
so-
but it's just a study, and they're trying to develop a food scoring system using 9 characteristics to rank these foods.
Ranking, that's what I was trying to think of.
Ranking, yeah. And it's interesting, they look at whether the item has food-based ingredients, how much fiber, protein, the nutrient ratios, the additives, and more. And like you said, this is just in development. So they come up with an idea, they test that, they
Put it out for review.
Put it out there for review. They get the feedback. So now they're in phase 3 of tweaking this ranking system so that it works and that it's something that can encourage, I think, the food industry to make some healthier foods, encourage us to choose the foods that are on the top, like all whole foods mostly, like all your fruits are going to be ranked up high.
Did they have a red, green, yellow idea about go, stop, caution?
So I think that's where the food pyramid thing came from, because it kind of looks like a pyramid.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, they have like the green, the yellow, and the red.
So I was thinking that might go into the labeling of foods at some point, you know,
Yes.
with a color coding that helps you recognize this is something I can eat, but it maybe not often.
Right.
That kind of thing.
So there was you know, like I said, it's not perfect yet, and the author admits that they're still working on it. And one of the things the author said was, you know, maybe we do need to put more weight, like a negative weight, on the foods that have a lot of added sugar in them or that are overly processed. And I agree 100%.
Yeah, and there seems to be some consensus on that in multiple things that we've read.
Right. So one of the biggest things that they took away from this is that beef by itself scored lower than Lucky Charms did. Now, there are lots of other cereals that scored really low, but just Lucky Charms happened to be like, it happens to have fiber, be low in fat.
And fortified with nutrients.
Right, and it's a whole grain. So perhaps that heavier weight on the fact that it has 13 grams of added sugar per serving and that it has some food dyes in it could maybe bring that down. But interesting enough, if you paired beef with beans and like a stew, then it raised that score quite a bit, right? Because now you have a more rounded nutrient profile. So I don't know, this is just an example when this came to me like, oh, are you kidding me? We don't have a new food guided pyramid.
No, and I heard that too, and I went,
It's just fear tactics and shock value.
And it was enough to drive me to the computer to look it up.
Same, yeah.
Yeah. I said, that doesn't agree with what I know. Which is our whole hope for our book club, is that we're sharing information that our listeners will say, I want to find out more about. And then when you have that information and people start telling you stuff, you go, that doesn't fit with what I understand.
Right.
Help me see what I've missed or what you've missed. Yeah. So we just did that one. Did you get another? Did somebody else send you something to listen to?
Mm-mm.
Oh, I thought you had a tape about the conservative.
No, that was it. So the original video I got was another guy talking about this Fox video.
Oh, okay.
And I just went back to the Fox video, the original thing.
Okay, good. Well, then I wanted to say in Jen Gunter's book, the Menopause Manifesto, which she talks about nutrition. She said the reasons. Oh, let's see. Looking at the diets, despite this medical truth, discussions about diets often fall by the wayside in favor of interventions when you go in for a medical appointment, such as menopausal hormone therapy or supplements. So the reasons are multiple and sometimes complex. While it's true many healthcare providers receive little or no training in nutrition, many are equipped to have these conversations, but they don't have time in a 20-minute or less office visit to discuss the changes of menopause and menopausal hormonal therapy. Never mind diet, unless they can bend time to their will. It can also be difficult for people to access the real experts on nutrition, which are registered dietitians or appropriately credentialed nutritionists.
Whoop, whoop. Thank you, Jen.
And I referred to Dr. Neil Barnard and his Your Body in Balance, and he was also talking about education of providers, and he mentioned that in the southern states in particular, there tend to be more older practicing physicians, and this is something that I know from medical education. We have modified the education to include more of these alternative support modalities, but these are the young providers that are coming out. And so they're going into practice with older educated folks. And I often would see my young students go into a clinical internship, and they would come back and say, well, you all were not talking about the real world. You were talking about the academic world. This is the way they really practice medicine. And so the influence of these earlier educated providers was challenging what we were trying to affect change in a good direction in medical education. It was tough because those people out there have been practicing medicine. You all are just sitting over here teaching it, and so it is going to take time. But now that we see these new providers, that when the medical people don't have the time because of the constraints of these corporate administered medical centers, which are now done by business people, not by. It used to be the medical folks ran these medical centers, and now they're just a commodity in the chain. And it's like, we're in here to make sure you all have a place to practice medicine, and that takes the business minds, I guess. But it's changed the way medicine's practiced in our country.
Yeah. It's funny, that takes me to a conversation I had recently about providers and how there's kind of a sweet spot in a provider. You don't want somebody, this is just a personal conversation I had, you don't want somebody who has been practicing forever and maybe behind the times a little bit, and you don't want someone brand new who doesn't have the experience.
Yeah.
So right in the middle is perfection. But
but both of these authors in both of these books have talked about the dismissal of the women who are complaining, that when they come in and say something's not right, I got brain fog, or I have incontinence, or they pat you on the knee and say, just go have a glass of wine, honey, and just bear through it, because they don't really have answers, and it's so that dismissive thing, a woman attempting to get help and then being dismissed. Then she says, well, I'm just out here on my own because no other women are going to talk to me about it.
Yeah.
It's quiet out here.
Yeah.
Where are those crickets? Where are those crickets? Yeah. So.
Well, I think it's great that she brings up that many providers don't really have the nutrition education. I'm going back to that comment. And it's interesting to me because I see some trained doctors getting into nutrition a little bit more.
Oh, yeah.
And
It's
I
happening.
can't help but say, like, is that really what we want? Or do we just want to put more registered dietitians out there and pay them better? Wink, wink. And let the doctors do their doctoring, and the doctors refer more to registered dietitians, refer, in these menopausal cases, refer more to experts like pelvic floor therapists.
I was just getting ready to say, this collaborative practice is where, we were attempting in my constellation of educators was trying to help build that collaborative team that takes time with the patient, because so often patients are, and Tim, you're in a hospital right now with somebody, there's a computer on the table and the actual patient in the room is kind of like ignored these days because, they just do these perfunctory tests on them rather than connecting with who's in that body. Yeah. And it's sad because that taking time, the laying on of hands, I understand, I'm here with you in this, is tremendously healing.
Yeah.
And that's what I think these additional support folks can do. I think, they should be paid for it, and somehow we ought to figure out how to make that happen. But knowing when to refer is a skill.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I've identified this. I know exactly who can help you with this. Let's get you set up. Those are good feeling things because we are people and we do need that relationship.
And I think that is why I would recommend this book, just because of the information that can be empowering, that maybe you don't have the best provider that will refer, but you can advocate for yourself, or you can get curious and ask more questions or bring topics up to your providers, or maybe seek out these professionals that round out your team.
Yeah. Well, she had some final thoughts on this because we didn't get to talk about all the stuff that we discovered we really wanted to talk about, which we didn't know we wanted to talk about at the beginning. So I'm probably going to be blogging on this, and you can find that on my website. I'm Eleanor Russell at 360 Health. That's the number's 360 Health. Number 4. letteru.com. I'm moving into the blogging world, so it's coming, but it's not there yet. But in her final thoughts, she talks about you have symptoms during this change, and some of us have more than others, and some of us may not experience any. It may just be a walk in the park, but that's not typical. But if you're a smoker, you should quit smoking. And if you are eating, you need to review your diet and maybe do that with a nutritional consultant, a dietitian.
Like well-balanced nutrition.
Yeah. And what do you do with your folks? I mean, if I came into you as a perimenopause and saying, look, I'm expecting menopause, what should I do about my diet?
Yeah, well, we always start with initial assessment where we look at the full picture, your stress, your sleep, your exercise, and a deep dive into dietary patterns, relationship with food. And so taking all of that into context and starting with some baby steps that can help you feel better and make some better nutrition choices, but that are also doable and aren't going to require you to stop everything you're doing and spend hours in the kitchen.
Yeah.
So.
And then if you find people that have deficiencies or their diet choices eliminate some nutrients, I hope I get a referral from you to help people with the supplementation choices.
Yeah.
And because there are bad players in all fields, but there are some terrible producers of supplements, and they have been identified, and you can read about the cases in the legal literature, where the FDA has said, get these off the shelves, and these things stay on the shelves. And they may not have what they say is in them. They may have contaminants in them. They may just not be what would help you, even though you think it's going to help you. So anyway, you need to review your diet and find out if you have deficiencies and supplement if necessary. Exercise, you said that?
Yeah.
And any kind of exercise?
So you want moderate level exercise, about 150 minutes a week. Yeah. And that could mean, I like that Jen mentions that you can break that up.
Yes.
You can break that up. So that could be like working in the yard, like
we were just talking
about. It could be little mini walking breaks that you take. So it all adds up. Just get your heart rate up throughout
just
the day.
Don't sit all day.
Yes.
Yeah, don't be sitting. And then cognitive behavioral therapy, she says, is perhaps a good idea to support you through this. And I was wondering, with our colleague Cyrus Bush, who's is an advocate for
tapping,
emotional freedom technique, or tapping as we call it, I wonder, I'm thinking it would be even more effective than the CBT. And then for some women, moving into the supplemental estrogen products may be a good choice. We were frightened initially from the Women's Health Initiative that the women that were in the trial for the estrogen started having breast cancer and heart attacks, so they stopped. But when you dive down into which women had those effects, then we were able to find out for some of the women it was a benefit, for some of them you don't. So you've got to have a medical evaluation to determine which, are you a candidate or not,
right,
and are you willing to take the risks for the benefits, and that's a long discussion. She also, Jen Gunter, talks about finding the right provider, and there is a menopause society, and there's one international and there's a Canadian one or whatever, but you can go on the internet and find providers that are informed about all these details that you might not want to know and would like someone else to know who's taking care of you. And as far as how they test you when you find a provider, if you're getting salivary tests, she says, they're useless. They're inaccurate. So, I have run into several women who've said, I got this saliva test and it tells me this, that, and that. And they're changing their life based on these results. So I think we do need to have some caution about who are you seeing and what kind of tests, because it sounds scientific. Mm-hmm. And, all right, hormone levels, getting your FSH and LH and estradiol checked may not be necessary. Heavy hormone therapy, she says, if someone tells you it's 100% safe and you don't have to worry, it's a wonder drug, take it. She says, caution, find another provider. If they tell you to go to a compounding pharmacy to get your estrogen instead of a pharmaceutical company, she says, don't do that. But, it's interesting. She says, don't use topical progesterone. If someone gives you a tube of this stuff and says, rub it on your leg, just don't do it. And if the doctor is an anti-vaccine doc or another controversial proponent, maybe you want to find another provider. And she does say there are some supplements that can work, but you've got to do your homework.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that you got to do your homework, and I think we've done a lot of talking and highlighting the fact that there's good and bad players, right? And you just have to be cautious.
But don't be afraid of this change,
Yeah.
you know. And like Tim said in one of our episodes, we need to celebrate it. So we may come up with some sort of sisterhood celebration.
I like
Amen.
it. I like it.
Amen.
And let's talk about it more.
Yeah.
Let's make it normal to have conversation about hormones.
Destigmatize it.
Yes.
Oh, that's a big word.
Yeah, look at me. Hey, and while you're working in the yard, you can, to go back to a previous episode, you can practice grounding as well.
Oh,
That's right. Take your shoes and socks off.
I'm
and
all ready.
Get your feet on the dirt. I love it.
Yeah.
And a little forest bathing along the side could help. You know, and actually that does help. Because the psychological aspects of this change can be overpowering, and sometimes reconnecting with nature is an excellent way to get your bearings.
Absolutely. Well, we really hope this conversation helps have more conversations around menopause. And we appreciate our listeners so much. Thank you for allowing us in your earbuds or in your car to have these conversations. And if you enjoy this, please do share so that we can keep having these book club conversations and informing you about these topics and these new books that come out. And so give us a share, give us a like, and we appreciate you.
And don't forget, menopause doesn't happen in a vacuum, and you are awesome.
Yes. And I'm Kristen Norton with Well Balanced Nutrition, where we offer nutrition coaching. Please visit us at wellbalancednutrition.com.
See you next time.
And opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and are not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted, and no part can be reproduced without the expressed written consent of Kristen and Eleanor.